Hello and welcome back. I'm Joshua Barnes and you're watching NewsX World. Let's first take a look at our top stories. France defends its decision to recognise a Palestinian state amidst domestic and international criticism. France's foreign minister argues that the decision goes against Hamas as it stands for a two-state solution. Delegations from Iran and the E3 nations of Germany, France and the UK have arrived ahead of diplomatic talks on Iran's nuclear activity. The E3 leaders have threatened snapback UN sanctions amid nuclear tensions following Iran's 12-day war with Israel and then US intervention. Thailand says that the number of civilians evacuated from its border with Cambodia has risen to 138,000. Meanwhile, clashes continue as tensions remain high. The UN's rights chief has slammed Britain's ban on activist group Palestine Action as a misuse of the UK's counter-terrorism law. They have further asked the Starmer government to rescind its move. The Kremlin says that it is unlikely that a peace deal on the war in Ukraine will be completed in 30 days. This comes as Ukraine says a global Starlink outage has hit its military communications as peace efforts continue to stall. The Philippine Supreme Court has blocked an impeachment trial against Sara Duterte. The vice president was accused of misusing public funds and threatening to kill President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. by the lower house of the Philippine Parliament. US media reports suggest that Fed Chair Jerome Powell is privately adamant on serving out his full term, despite a continued dispute with President Donald Trump. The US leader made jibes at Powell in person and has publicly spoken out about wanting to fire the Fed chief. Saudi Arabia has signed off on a $6.4 billion deal with Syria to rebuild infrastructure, telecoms and the economy following the ousting of Bashar al-Assad. International efforts have stepped up as Syria works to recover from more than a decade of civil war. We start this hour as British Cabinet Minister Peter Kyle has said in an interview that Britain supports eventual recognition of a Palestinian state, but the immediate priority should be alleviating the suffering in Gaza and securing a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. Let's now listen to the British Science and Technology Minister.
So it is a manifesto commitment of this government that we want to establish statehood for Palestine. It needs to happen in a way that will be empowering and deliver the long-term peace and stability that Palestine needs. Sovereignty exists for a reason. And we need to make sure that that sovereignty can be exercised at the moment of attaining statehood. That is our purpose. So we are absolutely driven to end the suffering that we see today. We've got to act with every word we use, with international support, to get the food and the support into starving people who are starving in Gaza and suffering in Gaza today. But we will not forget the diplomatic challenges that we have and the diplomatic efforts that will be needed to deliver the statehood that they need, that Palestine needs, and that Israel needs when it comes to its security. This can only be delivered by a diplomatic solution. We need the ceasefire. We are calling for a ceasefire. And then, of course, we will do everything we can from a position of a supporter for the region to get the circumstances where there's negotiations for the long-term statehood in Palestine and security for the region that they need.
Well, these comments come after French President Emmanuel Macron said France intends to recognise a Palestinian state in September at the UN General Assembly, a plan that reportedly drew strong condemnation from Israel and the United States. In a statement on July the 24th, British Prime Minister Keir Starmer had also said that statehood was inalienable rights of the Palestinian people, reiterating his call for a ceasefire as a necessary step towards achieving a two-state solution. Well, joining us to discuss these latest comments from politicians in the UK and, of course, France, Professor Kobi Michael, a senior researcher at the INSS and Misgav Institute, who's joining us live from Israel. Thank you ever so much, Professor Michael, for taking the time to speak with us. We've seen in recent days, of course, more nations speaking out against Israel and also speaking out about the situation currently going on in Gaza. We know that Benjamin Netanyahu has been persistent in pushing forward with his aims, which of course is returning all the hostages currently being held both dead and alive by Hamas, but also making sure that an attack like the devastating, horrific attack of October the 7th is not repeated. Do you think that these comments from politicians will have any sway on Benjamin Netanyahu, or will he continue with his plan despite mounting global pressure?
Hello, thank you for having me. The problem is not Benjamin Netanyahu and the declarations that were made by Benjamin Netanyahu. The problem is Hamas. And the idea that Hamas prefers almost 3 weeks to remain in its position, not to reach to an agreement, although Israel did much more than once concessions, and although all the mediators, be it the Egyptians, the Qatarians, and the Americans, are saying that the only obstacle now in front of an agreement is Hamas, and although the situation, at least according to Hamas Ministry of Health, is not less than catastrophic in the Gaza Strip, they have their time and they have their demands, and they are not willing to reach to an agreement. So the problem is not Benjamin Netanyahu, the problem is Hamas. And I think that all the allegations and all the pressures from the international media, from the international community, should be addressed solely to Hamas.
Professor Michael, of course we know that Iran was weakened with military and nuclear facilities targeted during that 12-day war by Israel and then the United States. And we've also seen, of course, military action within the Gaza Strip from Israel, which has impacted Hamas. We can acknowledge that Hamas is weaker than when they launched those devastating October 7th attacks, the mass killings and hostage takes. Is there some understanding, do you think, from the Israeli government that a ceasefire could be a possibility, given the fact that Hamas are now so much weaker than they were, which then could potentially lead to a further ceasefire and also end the devastating situation in Gaza that's being reported by so many groups? Tens of thousands of civilian casualties reported, issues with malnourishment of children also being reported. Yes, Hamas have started this conflict, but is it not part of the process that Israel maybe look at the current situation for children who we know can't be parts of Hamas given their tender age and the suffering they might be facing?
I recommend that we will not confuse ourselves with regard to Hamas. Although Hamas is much weaker today in comparison to what Hamas was until October 7th, Hamas is still there. It is still an effective sovereign in the Gaza Strip. It still controls territory and most of the population. And Hamas leadership continues believing in their political, religious, ideological, national vision, where the state of Israel does not exist. They do not intend to dismantle themselves. They do not intend to leave the Gaza Strip, and they do not intend to give up on their potential influence on the next civilian government in the Gaza Strip. And therefore, Israel cannot afford itself that Hamas will remain in any shape, in any form, as a governmental or a military entity in the Gaza Strip. And this is exactly the reason for the unbridgeable gap between Israel and Hamas, where Israel is willing to cease the war, to end the war by releasing all the hostages and by dismantling Hamas and evacuating the Gaza Strip from Hamas, okay, or enforcing Hamas to leave the Gaza Strip and to enable a new civilian governance and the beginning of the reconstruction process and the prosperity for the Gazans. Hamas is not willing to leave the Gaza Strip, and Hamas is not willing to end the war and to release all the hostages and to leave the Gaza Strip or to dismantle itself. This is exactly the gap. The gap is unbridgeable, and therefore I believe that even if we will reach to an agreement now in Doha with Hamas, which is a partial agreement for 60 days, I do not believe that we will be able to reach or to realize the second phase of this agreement or negotiation, because the gaps remains unbridgeable. And therefore, I believe that the only valid solution is to occupy the Gaza Strip, to finalize the dismantling of Hamas, to enable the formation and the establishment of a new civilian governance, and to begin the reconstruction process where Hamas is not there in the Gaza Strip. I see no other option.
Yes, Professor Michael, I do understand what you were saying, and of course it takes two sides to agree to this ceasefire deal. Of course, Israel agreed to the Witkoff proposal that would see a partial hostage release, a 60-day ceasefire, and a partial retreat of Israeli forces, but still some presence in the Gaza Strip. I'm conscious of what you said as we do bring an end to this discussion. I'm conscious of what you said about completely occupying Gaza, that being the only way that Israel can guarantee that Hamas, of course, won't repeat this attack. But at what cost? Humanitarian relief, of course, is an issue. How many civilian lives in Palestine need to be ended in order for this situation to be resolved from an Israeli point of view? Is the Palestinian casualty numbers that we're hearing being reported irrelevant to Israel and the government, given the fact that the mission is still ongoing, and it seems that unless there is a concrete ceasefire, it will continue, with more reports of deaths around aid centres continuously over the past few weeks?
I will try to reply by using, I would say, two explanations. The first one is that I believe that the idea of, or the rationale of occupying the entire Gaza Strip, not in order to remain there, okay, but in order to assure the dismantling of Hamas, will be resulted with a cheaper price with regard to casualties of Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. It will be much cheaper than the continuation of the current situation. Secondly, in a war, and unfortunately we are in a war, the first aim or the first objective or the first obligation that you have is to win, to defeat your enemy. This is the first obligation that the state and the responsible state has vis-a-vis its own citizens. So the obligation of Israel is to defeat Hamas, okay, and to make the utmost efforts in order to prevent or to minimize collateral damage. This war could have been ended on October 8th, almost 2 years ago. This war is not ended, not because of Israel, but because of Hamas. And although, as you have mentioned before, Hamas is much weaker, they believe that they are able to reconstitute themselves and to be much stronger. If they wouldn't have believed, they wouldn't have insisted, okay, in this negotiation. They believe that they are with the upper hand. They believe that the time works in favor of them. They see interviews like that all over the world. They see the international media. They see the international pressures on Israel. They see the domestic, the internal disputes in the very vital Israeli democracy, and they believe that they will be able to defeat the state of Israel and to make another 7 October. And by the way, this is not my interpretation. This is exactly what Hamas leaders say repeatedly, that the October 7th attack of 2023 is only the first one, and they are going to repeat it, and they are going to do it again and again and again until they will eliminate the state of Israel. And they are backed by Iran until these days. They are backed by Qatar until these days. They are backed by Turkey until these days. And unfortunately, they are backed by the international media and by international organizations, mainly the United States, the United Nations, that should have been dismantled long ago.
Professor Kobe Michael, thank you ever so much for your time and providing those opinions and insights. We will, of course, continue to bring you all the developments from the ground in Gaza, but also through diplomatic channels. But we move on now, and at least 16 people, including a Thai soldier, have been killed in deadly clashes between Thailand and Cambodia. Both countries don't show any signs of currently backing down. Thailand's acting Prime Minister, Phumtham Wechayachai, has warned that cross-border clashes could develop into war. Here is what he had to say.
การนี้ประเทศต้องการความสามัคคีของคนในชาติแล้วเหตุการณ์ที่กำลังเกิดขึ้นและมีลักษณะที่บุกรุกรุกล้ำแล้วก็สร้างความเสียหายกับชีวิตประชาชนนะครับอย่างที่บอกนะครับว่ามันมีลักษณะเกิดภาวะรุนแรงขึ้นนะครับมันจะพัฒนาไปสู่สงครามได้ซึ่งขณะนี้ยังถือว่าเป็นการปะทะกันนะครับโดยใช้อาวุธหนักที่รุนแรงนะครับเราก็ได้พิทักษ์รักษาพื้นที่ของเราไม่ให้ล่วงล้ำเข้ามาแล้วก็รักษาอธิปไตยของประเทศชาติอย่างรุนแรงอย่างเข้มข้นนะครับแล้วก็ทางกองทัพเข้าใจเจตนาร่วมกันได้คุยกับทุกเหล่าทัพ
Meanwhile, the spokesperson of Thailand's foreign ministry has said that the country is seeking a bilateral solution to the escalated armed confrontation with Cambodia. As per reports, over 4,000 people have been displaced from their homes near the border. United Nations chief has called on both countries to show restraint. Earlier, countries such as China, Malaysia and even the United States have offered to mediate between the two Southeast Asian neighbours. Well, joining us to discuss this ongoing escalating situation is Dr. Sanjay Kumar, an international communications strategist who is joining us from Thailand. Dr. Kumar, thank you for taking the time to speak with us. Let's look at a situation on the ground which currently doesn't seem to be easing. Third-party intervention has been dismissed. How quickly could this turn into an all-out war?
I'm sorry, I missed your question. Please repeat again.
No worries. I'm just looking at the current situation and how it's escalating with refusals for third-party intervention. And I just want to see how quickly this could escalate into an all-out war and what the ramifications would be for the wider region.
Okay. Actually, I've been closely following of the latest developments happening in Thailand here now. And I think the situation is quite tense between both countries, Cambodia and Thailand, at diplomatic level. And there are certain advisories issued by the Thai government as well as the embassies of different countries in Bangkok to their citizens. I think the third-party interest, as you said, is very critical here, and there's a lot of countries who condemn the attacks which was done by Cambodia, and then escalating the military operations between the both countries. I think that we have to divide into two parts. Part one is what is happening at the military level, and the second thing, what is happening at the people-to-people understanding about the situation. So there's two different parts here. So I think the general sense of the people in Thailand, they are not used to for such kind of conflicts that goes to the loss of the lives, and then they're very peaceful country, and somehow they do not want to enter into such kind of what do you call this situation where both countries are clashed with each other through the army, and then there's again the disturbing the people, loss of lives, and something. Okay, now my point is that since I'm in Bangkok, Thailand, so the situation near the border areas is quite tense, but people in Bangkok they have observation about what's happening in the situation, and it looks like very much normal life in Bangkok. But
yes, Dr. Kumar, I'm sorry to interject. We are unfortunately out of time, but thank you ever so much for that insight, and we hope you stay safe as well. We stay in the Indo-Pacific region now, as China's foreign ministry has said that the European Union should relax restrictions on the exports of high-tech products to China, and that the narrative about China's overcapacity was a one-sided understanding of supply and demand. Guo Jiakun, a spokesperson for the Chinese Foreign Ministry, also added that China was committed to importing more marketable, high-quality products from the bloc. Let's have a listen in to what the spokesperson had to say. Well, we are now joined by Andrew Latham as those comments are not heard. Andrew joining us as the Professor of International Relations, joining us from Minnesota. Andrew, thank you ever so much for taking the time to speak with us. What's the significance of these trade discussions between both the EU and China, of course, in the face of uncertainty?
Well, the deep background is that the World Trade Order is evolving and changing. You will recall that the U.S. after World War II built the so-called Bretton Woods system, which was premised largely on free trade. The Cold War broke out. It was meant to be a global system that got short-circuited. But after 1991 and the Soviet Union went away and the Cold War ended, we had this planet-wide, more or less free trade arrangement. The World Trade Organization being the institutional backbone of that new international political economic order. And in recent years, that too has begun to fall apart. And we've seen a number of phenomena that reflect that, one of which is the emergence of the BRICS as a kind of thinking shop as to how to reorder the world political order and economic order so that it favors the global south. But we also see a lot of these bilateral deals being done. President Trump is perhaps the avatar of that. He wants to do bilateral deals with everybody. But China is in the game, and so is the EU, and that's why they've sat down to hash out this bilateral, not global, not internet, but bilateral between the EU and China. So that's the deep background. But more pertinently and to the point this morning here in Minnesota is that there's a geopolitical and an economic dimension to this. China has a very bad track record when it comes to stealing intellectual property. And anything that lowers the barriers to that, especially in the security and defense realm or adjacent realms, is going to be welcome to them. They're looking to modernize their military. They're looking to be a peer competitor with the US. And any edge that they can get, any time they can get somebody else to do the grunt work, as it were, in terms of defense or defense-related technology, and then they can get their hands on it relatively inexpensively, that's good. There's also the economic dimension. They simply want to be able to purchase high-end, high-value-added European goods at a reasonable rate with low tariffs, and they want to be able to export their goods. And China, of course, is no longer manufacturer of cheap goods. It's an exporter of really high-value-added technology. So there's a lot of money to be made. So that's against the background of a changing world order. We have China and the EU both wanting access to each other's markets, but in the Chinese case, we also have them looking to secure access to defense-related high technology.
Andrew, thank you ever so much for that insight. You will be staying with us as we move on, and the United States has approved a $4 billion loan guarantee to help Poland finance new weapons purchases. The agreement has now been signed in Warsaw. The loan guarantee is being provided under the US Foreign Military Financing Programme and will support ongoing efforts to modernise Poland's armed forces. As per reports, it is the third such loan granted to Poland in recent years. Last year, Washington provided a $2 billion loan guarantee, which officials say Warsaw used to help fund the purchase of Patriot air defence systems, HIMARS long-range artillery, Abrams tanks and F-35 fighter jets. We'll now hear what Poland's defence minister has had to say about the agreement.
Po raz kolejny otrzymujemy gwarancje od rządu Stanów Zjednoczonych potwierdzone decyzją Kongresu USA. Jesteśmy z tego bardzo dumni, jesteśmy bardzo wdzięczni, jesteśmy gotowi spożytkować te pieniądze najlepiej jak potrafimy. Dla transformacji, modernizacji polskiej armii, dla budowy najsilniejszych zdolności obronnych w Europie.
Well, Andrew, thank you ever so much for staying with us. Of course, this isn't the first deal between the US and Poland, but defence is, of course, the main topic here. Those Patriot missile systems we know from the ongoing Russia-Ukraine conflict are vital in defending against potential missile and drone attacks. How significant is this in the face of that Russia-Ukraine war? Of course, Poland bordering Ukraine. We've seen Polish jets be scrambled as well, with Russian strikes moving further westward. Do you think this is further support from the United States to Europe in the fight potentially against Russia? Of course, it's going on with Ukraine and many other Western allies also supporting Ukraine too.
Yes, well, from an American national interest perspective, this is a win-win. These are relatively, from an American perspective, low-stakes loans, $2 billion here, $5 billion there. Pretty soon you'll be talking about real money, but for the moment, these are loan guarantees and the stakes are relatively low. It serves America's national security interests in that it helps blunt and contain Russia. Not so much in Ukraine, which is not going terribly well for the Ukrainians, unfortunately, but for the Baltic states and for Poland. Poland, of course, is now the European military superpower. It spends 5% of GDP on defense. It's really taking this seriously. It's looking to acquire cutting-edge American military equipment that are suited to the modern battlefield, not the battlefield of 1945 or 1995, but to 2025. And so from an American perspective, blunting Russia's ambitions in the Baltic and Eastern Europe, that's good from an American perspective. But we shouldn't forget that these loans are being offered at discount rates to Poland so that it can buy American military equipment. It can keep Americans employed. It can help with the balance of trade between Europe, broadly understood, but especially between Poland and the United States. So for the Americans, it's I was going to say win-win. It's win economically, it's win strategically, but it's lose in another sense. The United States is sending much of its most advanced military equipment to Ukraine or to the eastern-most members of NATO. That's leaving very little in America's arsenal to deal with challenges and threats elsewhere in the world, Taiwan being the most obvious example, but not the only one. So it's win-win-lose in a sense. For the Poles, of course, it's a big win strategically. They are acquiring the very, very best and most modern kit that the U.S. has to offer, and it's proven its worth in the battle space of Ukraine. So it's a win situation for them, even though they have to repay the loan at some point. But that's way down the road. So that would be my initial take.
Yes, absolutely, Andrew. Thank you ever so much for joining us on both of those topics. We move on now, and Nayara Energy has appointed Sergei Denisov as its new chief executive, replacing Alessandro Destorides. As per sources, the leadership change was decided at a board meeting. However, Nayara Energy has not yet released an official statement regarding the transition. Destorides, who became CEO in April 2024, has not commented on his departure. The company, along with the Indian government, has expressed opposition to recent European Union sanctions imposed on Nayara Energy, describing the measures as unilateral. This leadership change comes amid ongoing challenges related to the sanctions. Moving on, resident doctors in England began a 5-day strike over pay disputes with Prime Minister Keir Starmer's Labour government. The British Medical Association, also known as the BMA, argues the 5.4% pay rise offered fails to address years of pay erosion for resident doctors, who make up nearly half of the medical workforce. Picket lines appeared outside hospitals, marking a return to industrial action last seen in 2023 amid high inflation and stagnant wages. Health Minister Wes Streeting called the strike reckless and needless, urging the BMA to postpone strikes and work on a resolution. Meanwhile, doctors say the strike isn't just about pay, but also about the state of the NHS and the government listening to their concerns. Public support for the strike has declined, with 52% opposing it and 34% favouring it, that according to recent survey reports. Well, that is all we have time for, but we will be back shortly with more of your latest international news.